I arrived at my parents' house in the morning for our family trip, but only a golden retriever was there. Then my phone rang. "We're off on a cruise. Take care of the dog," my sister laughed next to them. "Don't worry, we'll bring you back a special gift." When they returned, they stepped inside and froze in pure terror. Laura Bennett gazed out the window, preparing herself mentally for the day ahead. She picked up her smartphone and checked her work emails. Despite it being Sunday morning, 3 urgent messages had already arrived. "I'll deal with those later," she muttered quietly as she pulled her hair back into a ponytail. After 15 years as a real estate consultant, her reputation was unshakable. Clients valued her sharp analytical skills and decisiveness, and her name had become a brand in the Los Angeles real estate market. Her husband, David, spotted Laura from the bedroom and smiled gently. "Are you ready for today?" Laura shrugged. "Just like always, it'll be a perfect family day with my mother, father, and sister." David didn't miss the sarcasm in her voice. He stood beside her and put his arm around her shoulder. They had chosen not to have children, prioritizing their careers and enjoying their freedom instead. However, Laura's family, especially her mother, Susan, didn't understand this choice. "Just look at Emily," was Susan's typical refrain. Laura's sister, Emily, 4 years younger, was the perfect daughter in her mother's eyes. She worked at a travel agency, always obeyed her mother, and never missed family events. In contrast, Laura was labeled a workaholic and often missed family gatherings because of work. "How long will you stay today?" David asked. As brief as possible, Laura answered honestly. "I'll be back by evening at the latest. I have an important meeting tomorrow." David kissed Laura's forehead. "You'll manage fine. I'll be working all day, but should be home for dinner." Laura returned a grateful smile. David understood the complexity of her family relationships, a strange mixture of love and obligation. While driving, Laura thought about her father, Henry. Since retiring, he spent his time gardening and fishing. He was a mild-mannered, quiet man who often remained in Susan's shadow. Henry was proud of Laura's success but never expressed it in front of his wife and younger daughter. When Laura was a child, her role in the family was clear. She was the responsible one. She watched over young Emily when their parents were busy working, maintained excellent grades at school, and helped with chores at home. Her personal wishes and dreams were always secondary to the family's needs. Turning left onto Sunset Boulevard, Laura entered the upscale neighborhood where her childhood home stood. It was a 2-story house with a spacious yard and old-fashioned charm, inherited from her grandparents. But there was a fact few people knew: legally, the house was under joint ownership between Laura and her parents. Her grandfather had wisely arranged for the family property to be passed securely to the next generation. Laura rarely thought about this fact. In her mind, it was just the house where her parents lived and managed. She was content with her career and current life, but occasionally her dormant sense of ownership would awaken. Parking in the driveway, Laura took a deep breath. Today's family trip had been planned by Susan weeks ago to strengthen family bonds, Susan had said. Laura had inwardly sighed but agreed to participate as promised. Before she could ring the doorbell, eager barking came from inside the house. At least one welcoming presence awaited her, Max, the family's golden retriever. Laura smiled slightly. Perhaps today wouldn't be so bad after all. When she touched the doorknob, it was unlocked. Laura entered and called out, "I'm here." There was no answer. Instead, Max came bounding from the hallway, greeting her enthusiastically. "Mom? Dad?" Laura called out again. Beyond Max, wagging his tail happily at her feet, the house was oddly silent. 8:15. Laura checked her watch. She had arrived precisely at the meeting time for the family trip, as promised. Susan had said on the phone, "Everyone will gather at 8:00 in the morning, and we have breakfast before departing, Emily." Laura peered into the living room. Morning sunlight was streaming in gently, illuminating the antique figurines Susan cherished, but there was no sign of anyone. Heading to the kitchen, she found the coffee maker stopped, with half a pot of coffee. It was still warm, indicating someone had been there recently. Max followed her around, occasionally whining to get her attention. "What is it, Max? Do you know where everyone went?" Laura spoke to the dog as she began climbing the stairs. Her parents' bedroom door was open. The bed was neatly made, but Susan's makeup was scattered across her vanity table, an unusual sight for her typically meticulous mother. The adjacent guest room, Emily's room, was similarly empty. Laura began to feel uneasy. Had there been an emergency? But if so, why hadn't anyone contacted her? She checked her smartphone again, but there were no new messages. When she returned downstairs, Max was waiting for her by the front door, staring at her as if he wanted his collar and leash put on. "Want to go for a walk?" Laura asked. "But I need to find the family first." At that moment, her smartphone started ringing. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. Laura sighed with relief and answered, "Mom, where are you?" "I arrived at the house, but nobody's." Susan's cheerful voice rang out. In the background, Laura could hear the sound of waves and people laughing. "Switch to video call." Confused, Laura switched to video. The screen showed her parents and Emily standing on the deck of a cruise ship, all three wearing sunscreen and sunglasses, already in vacation mode. "Surprise!" they shouted in unison. Laura was speechless. She felt her expression rapidly changing from confusion to understanding and gradually to anger. "What's going on?" she asked quietly, but with evident anger in her voice. "We're setting off on a cruise," Susan said excitedly. 2 weeks in the Caribbean. Emily found a special discount, but, there were only reservations for 3 people. "And since you said you were busy with work," Henry cut in, glancing slightly at his wife, "we didn't want to bother you." Laura tried to comprehend their words. "So you decided to leave without telling me? But who called me for a family trip?" "Oh, about that," Susan said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Actually, we wanted you to take care of Max. Dogs aren't allowed on cruise ships, and he would hate a pet hotel, wouldn't he?" "Take care of the dog," Emily said, laughing in the video. She seemed either unaware of Laura's anger or indifferent to it. "And don't worry, we'll bring you a special gift." Laura was at a loss for words. This was her family, making decisions based on their own convenience, always expecting Laura to accommodate their plans. It was a pattern unchanged since childhood. "When will you be back?" Laura finally managed to ask. "In 2 weeks. Susan said happily. "I've sent the details by email. Max's food is in the storage cabinet, and he needs walks twice a day. Oh, and Miss S? Jones next door will check in occasionally." Laura looked at Max, who gazed up at her innocently, wagging his tail. She took a deep breath. "All right," she said calmly. "Have a good time, thank you." "You're always so reliable," Susan said. "Bye now. The ship is about to depart." After the video call ended, Laura sank onto the sofa. Max put his head on her lap, looking up at her with comforting eyes. "It's just you and me, Max," she whispered. Anger and betrayal swirled within her. Laura stood up and walked to the bookshelf in the living room. As if guided by something, she pulled out an old document file. Inside was the deed to the house. She reviewed the papers, confirming the house was indeed under joint ownership between her and her parents. Her smartphone rang again. This time, it was from David. "How's it going? Has the family trip started?" His voice was cheerful. Laura explained the situation. David's sigh was audible over the phone. "That's terrible. Are you coming home?" Laura looked out the window, then at Max, who sat faithfully by her side. "No," she said slowly. "I have some thinking to do." After ending the call, Laura began searching for a lawyer's phone number. Her years of experience as a real estate consultant had given her an idea. "Max," she smiled at the dog, "let's start a new life together." Max barked happily, as if understanding her words. Laura opened her laptop and began researching the latest real estate market data. There was a determined glint in her eyes. "This will be a gift from the abandoned," she whispered. Laura took a sip of coffee and stared at her laptop screen. For the past 3 days, she had been staying at her parents' house, formulating a plan. Max was sleeping contentedly at her feet. Outside the window, the gentle spring sunshine illuminated the beautiful view of the Silver Lake district. "Thomas, this is the price I'm thinking of," Laura said on the phone. The person on the other end was her longtime colleague, now one of the most highly regarded real estate attorneys in Los Angeles. "I want to set it slightly below market value. Quick sale is important." "I understand, Laura." Thomas's voice resonated from the phone. "Since it's jointly owned property, you legally have the right to proceed with the sale. Just don't forget you need to notify the other owners." "Yes, of course," Laura smiled. "I'll send the notification when they return from their cruise." After ending the call, Laura stroked Max's head. "Let's find a new home." Her apartment wasn't spacious, but it was sufficient for her, Max, and the necessary belongings. However, in the long term, she was considering a house with a backyard. Max needed a place to run around. Laura stood up and began walking through the house. It contained over 30 years of memories, some happy, some bitter. Family photos adorned the walls: her graduation, Emily's birthday parties, her parents' anniversary. On the surface, they looked like the perfect family. Entering the study, Laura opened the drawer of her father's old desk, where important documents were kept. She made copies of the house deed and scanned them to send to Thomas. She had also gathered the house's appraised value, property tax records, and recent sale prices of neighboring properties. As a real estate consultant, she knew this market intimately. Over the next 3 days, she prepared to put the house on the market. She arranged for photography and created promotional materials for potential buyers. Thanks to her professional network, everything progressed surprisingly quickly. While cleaning and organizing the house, she received a message from her mother. Attached was a photo of the 3 of them smiling against a backdrop of blue sea. The message read, "Having a wonderful time. How's Max?" Laura sighed. She replied simply, "Max is fine," and as she stared at the photo, a firm resolve grew in her heart. On the 4th day, the first potential buyers visited the Carter family, a husband and wife with 2 children aged 10 and 8. They seemed drawn to the house's spaciousness and atmosphere, especially the backyard and the living room with its fireplace. "Perfect for this family," Laura told Max after they left. "The 2 children will play with you." That evening, she received an offer from the Carter family. It was slightly higher than her asking price. They liked the house and had offered favorable terms early to avoid competition. Laura accepted the offer and asked Thomas to prepare the purchase agreement. "That was remarkably quick," she said, sitting on the sofa with Max, "but I think this is the right thing to do." The next day, Laura began sorting through the house's mementos. She packed her personal items, childhood photos, and keepsakes into boxes. The rest of the family's belongings went into separate, labeled boxes. She rented a storage unit nearby to store them for when the family returned. "Should I throw this away?" she wondered, holding an old photo album. It contained pictures of her and Emily as children, rare moments when they actually appeared to get along. After hesitating briefly, she placed it in her own box. As the closing date approached, Laura prepared to live with Max in her condominium. She confirmed a pet-friendly policy and bought a bed and dishes for Max. Susan sent photos and messages almost daily. "Coming home soon. Can't wait to be back home." Laura read these but didn't reply. Instead, she focused on the sale proceedings. The day before closing, the final documents were completed. Laura signed at Thomas's office and made arrangements to hand over the keys to the Carter family. She was calm, but complex emotions swirled inside her. This wasn't just revenge. It was an act of reclaiming her own life. "We're moving tomorrow," she told Max. The dog responded to her tone, wagging his tail. The next morning, Laura made a final visit to her parents' bedroom. She placed a small card on the pillow. It read, "A gift from the abandoned." Her phone rang. It was a message from her mother, "Coming home tomorrow. Can you pick us up at the airport?" Laura read the message but didn't reply. Instead, She placed another card on the kitchen table with information about the storage facility where her parents' and Emily's belongings were kept. She also attached an invoice for the storage fees. Not exactly cheap, she chuckled softly. At noon, Laura stood in front of the front door. Max was on his leash, waiting beside her. The Carter family's car appeared on the road. They had come to receive the keys to their new home. Mrs. Bennett, thank you so much, Mrs. Carter said with a smile. Her husband was waiting in the car with their 2 children. This house will be the place for our new beginning. It's for a wonderful family. Laura smiled as she handed her the keys. Please take good care of it. Of course, Mrs. Carter promised. She looked up at the house and around the garden. It's the perfect place for our children to grow up. Laura walked to her car with Max. She looked back one last time at the house. There was sentimentality but no regret. Well, Max, she said, our new life begins now. Getting into the car, Laura took a deep breath. She checked the folder containing the title transfer documents, the storage contract, and all evidence of her plan. Everything was in order. She started the engine and drove away. In the rearview mirror, she saw the Carter family entering the house. Their children were running around excitedly. A new family was beginning to create new memories. Arriving at her apartment, Laura carried in Max's things and her own essentials. Her apartment was cozy but clean, bright, and big enough for Max. The window offered a view of downtown Los Angeles. Our castle, Max, she said, at least for now. That evening she had dinner with David. She told him everything that had happened. He was surprised but understood and supported her actions. I'd like to see their reaction when they get back, David said, laughing. Laura smiled. I don't want to see it, but I can imagine it. That night, Laura lay in bed with Max and felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. After their 2-week Caribbean cruise, a taxi carrying Susan, Henry, and Emily entered the quiet residential area of Silver Lake. Their faces were tanned and relaxed, their suitcases full of souvenirs. It was a wonderful vacation, Susan sighed. Thank you for your connections, Emily. Emily smiled proudly. That's the advantage of working at a travel agency. But I feel a bit bad about Laura. She'll understand. Susan waved her hand. Besides, we bought her that special souvenir. Yes, Henry said, looking out the window. But I'm a little concerned that we haven't heard back from her. She's busy as usual, Susan shrugged, and she's probably had her hands full taking care of Max. The taxi slowly pulled up in front of their house. Henry noticed first. The garden looks different, he murmured. The front yard's plants, always perfectly maintained, had changed somewhat. New flowers had been planted, and some old shrubs had been removed. I wonder if Laura did something, Susan frowned. The 3 of them got out of the taxi and retrieved their luggage. After paying the driver, they headed to the front door. Henry took out his key from his pocket and inserted it into the door. That's strange, he noticed. The key wouldn't turn. It doesn't seem to fit. You're just tired, Susan said. Let me try. But Susan faced the same result. The key wouldn't turn. Has the lock been changed? Emily asked, puzzled. Henry pressed the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened, but they were greeted not by Max or Laura, but by a stranger, a woman. Behind her, 2 curious children peeked out. Hello? The woman smiled. Can I help you? Susan was momentarily speechless. This is our house. The woman's expression changed. I'm sorry. We purchased this house last week. That's impossible, Henry stepped forward. There must be some mistake. This has been our home for over 30 years. Just a moment, the woman said. She turned around and called, John, could you come here? A middle-aged man appeared. His expression showed understanding when he saw the confused family. You must be the Bennett family, he said quietly. We are the Carters. Last week we purchased this house from Laura Bennett. What? Susan's voice rose. That's impossible. She has no right. According to the legal documents, she did have the right, John Carter said. All procedures were conducted properly. They passed the lawyer checks. Emily stood stunned. "Where's Max?" she finally managed to ask. "The golden retriever?" Mrs. Carter answered. "Laura took him. She said he was her dog, the color drained from the three faces." "May we see inside the house?" Henry asked in a trembling voice. The Carters exchanged glances and agreed. "Of course, please do." More shocks awaited as the three entered. Some furniture remained but had been rearranged. New paintings hung on the walls, and all their family photos were gone. Children's toys were scattered on the floor, asserting the presence of the new family. "I can't believe this was our home," John Carter said. "It's a wonderful place. The children love it." Susan walked around the living room. Her cherished porcelain collection was gone. Emily ran upstairs to check her room. Her former room had been transformed into a colorful children's room. Henry headed to the study. His precious fishing gear and book collection were nowhere to be found. "Where are our belongings?" he asked the Carter couple. "Laura must have left some message," Mrs. Carter said. "I think there was something on the kitchen table." The three rushed to the kitchen. There was an envelope on the table. Susan opened it to find the address of a storage facility, an invoice for the retrieval fees, and a small card that read, "A gift from the abandoned." "What does this mean?" Emily asked in confusion. Susan was at a loss for words. After a long silence, Henry quietly said, "Because we left her behind." While they stood stunned in the kitchen, the Carter couple waited uncomfortably in the entrance hall. "Is all this legal?" Susan finally asked. "Did she have the right to sell the house?" Mr. Carter took out folded papers from his pocket. "This is a copy of the purchase agreement. Laura Bennett signed as a joint owner. According to our lawyer, she had full rights." Susan took the paper with trembling hands and turned the pages. Her face paled. "Henry, this house wasn't just ours. Laura's name is in my father's will." Henry sighed. He instructed that Laura's name be added because she was the most responsible child. The three gathered again in the living room. Susan headed to the master bedroom. Another message card had been left there. "Meet me at the lawyer's office tomorrow at 11. Address attached. "What should we do?" Emily asked with tearful eyes. "Our belongings? Where will we live?" "We'll have to find a hotel for now," Henry said. He looked exhausted. "Tomorrow we'll meet with Laura and talk." The Carter couple offered them water and chairs. "If there's anything we can do," they said. As the three sat in the living room, Emily's smartphone rang. She picked it up and looked at the screen. "It's a message from Laura." Susan and Henry turned to her. Emily read the message aloud. "Your belongings are in storage. Details about the retrieval fee will come from the lawyer. Max is with me. He is fine." The room fell silent. Tears streamed down Susan's face. "What have we done?" she whispered. "How life can change in just 2 weeks." Henry covered his face with his hands. Emily stared at her smartphone, contemplating a reply to Laura, but she didn't know what to say. "Let's find a hotel," she finally said, "and tomorrow we'll go see Laura." The three left the house with their luggage. The Carter couple saw them off apologetically. "Take care," they said, while waiting for a taxi. The three seriously contemplated their actions for the first time in a long while. "I always thought she was responsible," Susan said. "I always thought she would respond to our demands, so we assumed she would never talk back," Henry said. Emily remained silent. She was thinking about the jealousy she had felt toward her sister, the complex emotions toward Laura, who was always successful and independent. The taxi arrived and the three loaded their luggage. Finally, they looked back at the house. The new family was watching them from the window. Their home was no longer theirs. "I raised you both in this house," Susan murmured. Emily placed her hand on her mother's shoulder. "We'll find a solution tomorrow." As the taxi drove away, the three gazed at the house through the window, and for the first time, they began to see things from Laura's perspective, always expected, always used, and finally left behind. "She taught us a lesson," Henry finally said, "and it's a painful one." Susan took out her smartphone from her handbag. She searched for Laura's number, trying to send a message, but she couldn't find the words. No apology could undo what they had done. The taxi headed downtown. Behind them, the house that was no longer theirs grew smaller, and ahead of them lay an uncertain future. "Come, Max," Laura called out in the spacious backyard. A year had passed, and the golden retriever was a little older but still energetic. He came bounding over to take a ball from Laura's hand. Laura's new home was on the west side of town, with a small but charming garden and a convenient home office for remote work. She had recently established her own real estate consulting company and had just hired her first employee. Breakfast was set on the terrace. David came out with coffee. Their relationship had deepened over the past year, and he now often spent weekends at Laura's house. "Are you meeting them today?" he asked quietly. Laura nodded slightly. Lunch at a cafe downtown. The relationship with her family remained complicated. Since that day, they had learned many things. Her parents and Emily eventually moved to a small apartment in West Hollywood with some of the funds Laura had sent them from the house sale. They somehow managed to start a new life. Susan found a part-time job at a local flower shop. Henry began teaching gardening classes at a community college. Emily continued her job at the travel agency, but without the glamorous perks she once had. The first few months were filled with bitter exchanges, but gradually, dialogue began. Susan was the first to send Laura an apologetic message. "I took you for granted." That was wrong. The repair of their relationship progressed slowly, but Laura didn't completely cut them off. She set limits and boundaries. "My life is my own. I won't sacrifice it for your convenience," she made clear. Today's lunch would be the third time all four sat at the same table. "Nervous?" David asked. "Not as much as before," Laura answered. "I can see they're learning." She surveyed the backyard. Max was lying contentedly in the sun. Her smartphone rang, alerting her to a message from the Carter family. They occasionally sent photos of the house. Today's photo showed their children playing in the backyard. "The house is wonderful. Thank you," the message read. Laura smiled. In an unexpected way, she had found peace. Her decision had become self-liberating, an opportunity to begin her true life. It was a journey of learning to follow her own choices and prioritize her own happiness. "I'm ready to go," she told David. He took Laura's hand. "You are truly a strong woman," Laura answered while stroking Max. "I just realized that my life is my own." She closed the door, gave Max a final greeting, and headed to the car with David. Building a new relationship with her family wouldn't be easy, but she would never be forced to make the same sacrifices as before. She had learned how to set her boundaries and protect them. Sometimes, the most important lessons are learned in the most painful ways, and sometimes, the best gifts come from those who were abandoned.